was we started to see what was happening to members of the Canadian military, and with something called a 5F category, which is a dishonorable discharge. And there's some strange wording in the writing of that, a dishonorable discharge because of personal weakness. Now, as a former military person, I find that language in this particular case to be highly, highly offensive. So,
as did many of your peers.
Yes, yes. So the first question I want to ask you is approximately, this class action lawsuit that you're involved with, you're representing several Canadian Armed Forces members, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Is the lawsuit against the Canadian military or the Canadian government?
Well, first of all, it's I want to clarify, it's not actually a class action.
Right.
It's actually a mass tort.
A mass tort.
So that means
okay.
that means that the named plaintiffs are the ones that are going to move forward with the lawsuit, and should it settle or we win, then they share in that equally, but no one else can apply for that settlement like they would in a class action. Okay. That being said, if we're successful, there'll be more lawsuits to come to follow up.
Yeah.
But the lawsuit is against the king, because when you sue the government, you sue the king.
Okay.
He's also commander-in-chief of the armed forces. It's against the Ministry of National Defense, so Ms. Anand and Ms. Thomas, who was deputy minister when all of this happened. And then it's against several generals. Air to top the list, and then the vice chief of defense staff, the commander of the Army, commander of Navy, commander of the Air Force, and then who else? I just looked at that statement of claim. There's also General Rutland. He was a colonel at the time. He was brigade commander out here in Edmonton, and he did some really unpleasant things to his people specifically that I have named him as well. Good. So it's quite a list.
And I want to get into that with the understanding that obviously we don't want to reveal strategy. And, I obviously want to, under the Privacy Act, there's things we can't disclose, but for things that are public domain and public knowledge, that's, fair game. But so how many roughly are on this mass tort that you're involved with? How many soldiers?
Approximately 350 active duty and veterans.
Wow.
Because some of them, of course, were kicked out.
Right.
Or voluntarily released, if you know what I mean.
Right.
About 350.
Wow.
Every branch, right from Army, Navy, Air Force, Rangers, cadet cadre, RMC.
Right.
I've got everybody's covered.
Everybody. So. Are you finding, is it closed now, or are there people who are still allowed to sort of come forward and join in on this?
The first one is now closed,
okay.
But I do have a waiting list. As you can imagine, as word has been getting out about all of this, we're starting to get lots of inquiries, especially after the decision by the External Grievance Committee.
Right.
So we've developed a waiting list.
Okay. Yeah, I did a video about the Grievance Committee last week where I was talking about, I think I called the video the intentional managed decline of the Canadian Armed Forces, something along those lines, because, we're in a situation with the Canadian Forces. I think the attrition rate, meaning the people leaving the Canadian military versus new ones coming in, but the people leaving the Canadian military is somewhere around 18.5% right now. And they're struggling greatly in this country to recruit new people coming into the military. I think, for example, one of our frigates had to do their own recruiting drive to get people to come on, like literally get on board that ship as trained sailors. Because for a year, yeah, because they're not getting enough people coming into the recruiting centers because they can't. And we can talk a little bit about why that is. But So we're in a situation with the Canadian military where not only are they not coming in the door, but the ones that we have trained are exiting at a rate of about 18.5%. And
Yes.
some of these trained people, for example, I know of a highly skilled, highly trained helicopter pilot who only had 4 years left to go before he qualified for his military pension and benefits, was 5F'd, kicked out of the Air Force for refusing, and I'm going to refer to it as the experimental injection, because he refused to have his bodily autonomy violated, as well as he believed that the government or the military had no possible conceivable way to meet the standard of informed consent. So obviously I have to be very careful in the way I phrase these things, because I've already got one strike from YouTube last week for telling the truth.
Yeah.
So, I know of another case. There's a female soldier in the Canadian military who was 7 months away from her retirement, was kicked out 5F. And
Yes.
I hear these stories all the time. So, for the viewers, you have to do 25 years in the military to qualify for a pension. And it's approximately, 50% of your best 5 years of service. That is the amount of your pension. So if you do 25 years, you get 50% of your pay for the rest of your life plus medical benefits. So, we've got a case where one of our military members was 7 months away from receiving her eligibility for pension and was kicked out of the military for personal weakness because she did not.
Moral weakness.
Moral weakness.
For something within their control.
Yes.
Some of the language has been used, yes.
So the language is rather disturbing in bullying, and we're going to get into the bullying. We're definitely going to get into the bullying because
there was lots of it.
Yes. And from my perspective, the things that I've heard that I have trouble confirming because I'm not in the military anymore. But I think the commanders that are doing the things that I've heard rumored to have been happening, if they are true, I believe that those commanders should be, I think they should be horsewhipped as well as relieved of duty, demoted in rank, charged at the very least, and removed from the Canadian military. But I'm not in control of that. What do I know? I'm just a fired software teacher from a college.
That's right.
So
I don't know. You got that retired behind your name.
Yeah, I can say that. I can say that, but that's a whole different episode. So let's talk about what's happening on the basis. What are the stories that you're hearing? So we to set this up, we have the Canadian military comes out with a experimental injection mandate, and that is an order or a directive given by the Chief of Defence Staff, and that is the highest ranking military member within the Canadian Forces, who answers to the Minister of National Defence. The Minister of National...
Not really.
Well...
answers to the King.
To the King.
But that's a whole other topic.
Yeah, but in sort of the succession, you've got the Prime Minister, you have another elected official who's a member of Parliament, and right now she is a member of Parliament who was given the portfolio of being the Minister of National Defence, and the Chief of Defence Staff, the highest ranking general, answers to her, reports to her, and the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister. And I know there's some other different relationships in there as well. But so we've got that sort of set up. The federal government comes out with a mandate. So General Eyre, who's the current Chief of Defence Staff, issues a directive telling all Canadian Forces members they have, I believe, from what I read, 14 days to comply with an official order to go and participate or take part in this experimental injection or face consequences. So I'm going to kind of break that down to two parts, because what the reaction is of the senior leadership within the Canadian military and how they're treating the soldiers after that directive comes out. And then there's, the bigger picture, the broader implications, and when we get into that grievance case that we found out on the 30th of May.